A lot of people were scared of what the real estate market was doing. And just like you said, I looked at it as an opportunity. I had nothing to lose. I think the best source is really just genuine relationships, like organic networking. I think the best way to play it is really just be aware. Real estate doesn't move that fast in comparison to, say, the stock market, right? You're not going to wake up and everything's just going to be completely different in the real estate world. People are finding success in so many different types of real estate. And that really opened my mind to, there's not just one way to do it. Like, there's a lot of ways.
The real estate world is changing. Opportunity is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the very best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs, overcoming our fears, transforming ourselves so we can transform our business. This is Investor Creator. Gabriel, welcome to Investor Creator.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, very good. So let's jump into your background. So I know you got started really young in the real estate world, just like I did, but kind of go through what you were doing that got you into the real estate world and what really propelled you into what we do now.
Yeah. So going back kind of to the beginning was during high school. I was really stayed in high school for the social aspect of it, and because I was a high school wrestler. And so I didn't have a lot of direction. Academia, school was just really not my environment. College wasn't something I was super interested in. So my senior year of high school, I had joined the Army National Guard, and I was training 1 week in a month, 2 weeks in the summer, just like the commercial. And a couple years after high school, I had some different odd and end jobs and such. But I picked up Rich Dad Poor Dad about 2 years after high school. And it was really the first book that I didn't want to put down. And, I'm sure a lot of your listeners have read the book. It's not a how-to book. It's just really a mindset around business and finances and money. And I was always attracted to business, and it just made sense. And so shortly after reading that book, I got called up and I was deployed to Iraq for about a year. And so I'd read this book, and on my deployment, I often thought about a lot of the lessons I learned in that book. And I started sharing with everybody, like, hey, I'm going to come back and I'm going to build this real estate empire. And, a lot of my friends were like, man, what are you talking about? You got to go back and go to school and get a job and all this stuff. And
you mean they weren't super supportive of your dream? They just wanted to I can't believe that.
Right. Exactly. Which now it's kind of neat because a lot of them actually, years later also started investing in real estate, and they're like, wait a minute, this makes sense, but we were all young, and, it was a dream, and they would ask, like, well, how are you going to do this? And it was, I don't know how, but I will, I'll find a way. So I got back from the deployment in 2004, and I just started looking for property. So, 2004, it was a hot market, and, I went to a lender. I got approved, even though I really didn't have a job, a stable income, anything like that. But this was during the subprime. So, after making just tons of offers and looking at properties for a year, a friend of the realtors, it was an off-market deal. And by then it's 2005. So it's like a year of looking, bought my first home. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. I rented out 2 of the bedrooms. Now they call it house hacking. I didn't know what house hacking was. It just made sense to rent 2 of the bedrooms out and live for less than I could anywhere else in town. So I did that in 2005. Again in 2006, bought another place with no money down. And in 2007, 5% down. And this was, this felt pretty easy. The banks were just giving out money, and you always hear the horror stories of the subprime. And I just didn't over borrow, even though it was 100% finance. I still got good deals in a hot market, and I just didn't overbuy. And so that's kind of how it started. 2006, I also opened up a small nutrition store, and, a couple years into that, it just really wasn't making any money. So, 2008, I owned 3 houses. And my store's not making any money, and my first son is born, and now I'm really going, oh shit, like, what do I do? And I took a bunch of odd and end jobs. So I was literally like Craigslist ad, like help wanted ads. I was just all sorts of odd and end jobs. It's like landscaping and just different things. And then I eventually landed a minimum wage job at at a high school working in a special education class. And about 3 months into that job is really what happened. About 3 months into that job, I was cleaning up shit that a kid threw all over the stalls, and I'm thinking about my goals and thinking
That will do that, I think.
that'll do it, and my heart goes out to these kids. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
there's a need. For me, it was just a wake up of what are my dreams? Like, what do I really want to do? And this is not a job that I want to, have even for a year, let alone a lifetime. And so I had to get serious. That year, I set a goal to replace that income. It felt very obtainable and achievable because it was such a low paying job that if I could replace that income with real estate, and I was cash flowing a little bit, a couple $100s a month on the other properties. But if I could replace that income, I could essentially quit my job and put more deals together. So I went to the bank and they said, there's no way we're giving you another loan. Guidelines have changed. You actually need 30% down. You need an income. You need, all these things that I didn't have before. And they just said, hey, sorry, things have changed. For you to qualify, you have to have a couple of years worth of solid income. And, I wasn't making enough money in the job to buy or qualify for any kind of house. And so I started looking at seller financing deals. I got on Craigslist every night and started typing in keywords like seller financing, owner terms, as is, cash only, for sale by owner, all these things. And I eventually found 2 duplexes side by side. It was 4 units and structured a deal that cash flowed almost to the dollar that I was making at that job. And so I finished out that school year and I stopped working. And so I became, I became financially free really young and quick, but I was far from wealthy. So when I stopped working, it wasn't that I had a ton of money. I was just able to replace my income and keep my expenses really low. And it's part of the story I just don't share enough. Like, I lived very frugally for a lot of years. So I had, 7 units and I was poor, and I wasn't going out buying fancy things. I wasn't, doing a lot of things. My focus was really on find more deals, and any money that I did make, any cash flow I had, put it back in the deal. That's how I got started.
Yeah. So let's kind of go back to the point where you decided, okay, I'm doing this job that I really don't like, but I'm going to replace my income through real estate, because I think that that's a really interesting point, because at this point you had 3 rentals already, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So I think a lot of people would say, gosh, I have 3 rentals already and it's not really supporting me. This real estate thing doesn't work.
Yeah.
So what was it that made you say, well, I'm going to dive deeper into real estate, because you really felt like it did work? So how does that happen?
So I think originally it went from, even before I had those 3 houses, like I was super motivated, right? I read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I think this is what I'm going to do. And I'm real motivated. And then 05, 06, 07, it felt pretty easy, right? Like in my mind, I already had that mindset. Like this is what I'm going to do. But in 2008, it was really just a test of that mindset more than anything. Cause I had a period of time where I went, oh geez, like I have a son on the way.
Yeah.
This business isn't going to make money. And so it was really that flip of, I got to get my mind right. I got to get my, am I serious about this? Do I believe this is something that I can do? And there was a period of time where I obviously went, okay, maybe this isn't going to work. And, I had those couple houses and I'm doing the math going, a couple $100s a month of cash flow. It's going to take a long time for me to build up any significant amount of wealth. But I knew there was an opportunity. I remember, reading something, years before about like, hey, just because the banks say no doesn't mean it has to stop you. At that time, I wasn't comfortable asking for hard money. I didn't know anyone with private money. And I just remember reading about seller finance and I thought, this is an opportunity and I don't want to get stuck in that rat race of working a job. So it was really more about just getting my mind right and then taking action. Because it would have been really easy to go, okay, I got these 3 properties. The bank said no. I have a job. I'm going to keep down that, just stay down that route until I can save enough money, 10 years from there to get 30% to buy the next one. And so, it was more about the mindset than anything.
Yeah, 100%, man. There's so much more going on between our ears than everything external. And, like right now, just this morning, I was reading an article on Bloomberg talking about how there could be a stay evictions for another year based on the COVID crisis. And, it's like, that's a big external problem for landlords, but there's also going to be opportunity, and it's almost equal opportunity to the same problem. So you went from getting pretty easy money because of how the mortgage financing world was at that time in 04, 05, and 06, and then everything changed in 08. And so almost nobody could get a basic loan for residential real estate as a landlord at this point because they were taking back so much in foreclosures. And so at this point, you decided, okay, well, I'm going to figure out seller financing. Is that right?
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And a lot of people were getting out of the market. A lot of people were scared of what the real estate market was doing. And just like you said, I looked at it as an opportunity. I had nothing to lose. So I have not conventionally purchased a property or, bought a property using conventional financing ever, to date, other than those first three properties. And even
That's
that's
beautiful.
subprime money. Like, I don't know if you can consider that, conventional financing,
I
but
don't
it's
think anything
always
was conventional in 04, 5, and 6. So I don't think
right.
so.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And with the seller financing, I just felt it was such a great opportunity because the terms are so flexible, right? And I was focused on cash flow. So a lot of people were saying, isn't this risky? Isn't this scary? And that first seller financing deal, I'm running the numbers. I'd analyzed a lot of deals. And so I'm looking at the numbers going, this makes sense. What am I missing?
Yeah, what's
I,
wrong with it? Yeah.
what's wrong with it? And what I realized is, like, I had nothing to lose. It was a no money down deal. I had literally nothing to lose. And it just made sense. I mean, I could have found a reason not to buy every property that I've ever purchased. I could have found a reason not to buy it. At the same point, I've never bought a property that I regret buying either. And so all the what ifs that could happen didn't outweigh the what if not buying the deal. And so I bought the deal.
So tell me about the negotiation that happened with that first seller. So was it your idea to go in and get seller financing, or did they bring it up? And then how did that transition work?
Yeah, so I found this property on Craigslist and they were offering seller financing. They had some terms written out, and the terms that they were offering, it penciled. Like, the property looked good. And that's really where I went, okay, what am I missing, or what are they not telling me? Because they're offering terms that make sense. And I negotiated on that a little bit. And I did a few more deals very similarly, similar neighborhoods, similar types of properties. And I was feeling like, man, I'm winning. Like, I need to go out and just educate all these sellers on why they should carry financing. I'm doing these no money down deals. But what I found is the sellers that carried the financing, they already wanted to carry financing. And I've never talked a seller into carrying financing. I've never had to convince or educate a seller into carrying financing. Not that you couldn't, because I know people that have gone out and really educated sellers on what that is. But after I did a few of these deals and I thought, like, gosh, I need to go share this information with all these sellers, what I found was all the sellers that wanted to carry financing already wanted to carry financing, right? So the conversation and negotiation wasn't a hard conversation, because it wasn't about, hey, here's what seller financing is. It was, they wanted to carry financing. They already understood the advantage of carrying financing as a seller. And then the conversation was as simple as me just saying, hey, what kind of terms are you interested in? And that would always be my starting point. Just me basically saying, hey, what kind of terms are you interested in? Or what are you looking for? What terms would be most attractive to you? And then I would just shut up and hear, just listen to what they have to say. And I would see if I can structure terms that fit what they needed and also fit what I needed.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. So one thing that I kind of gathered from that is most people are going to know what their end result needs to be. And so if we can create something that works for both sides, then we're going to have pretty easy transactions. So that makes a lot of sense. And so let's put it in perspective now. So how many units do you have that you've created at this point through almost all non-conventional means?
Yeah, I have 175 units. I'm
Beautiful.
current. Yeah, I'm currently selling off. And I don't sell very often. But I'm selling off some of my early purchases right now. One sold last month, another one's pending, and part of that's where the market is. It's
Yeah.
there's strong equity positions. The properties are they're not cash flowing as much as some of my other properties, and it's just the right time to sell some of this stuff.
Very good. And so whenever you were first doing your seller finance deals, were those single family transactions as well?
They were small multifamily. So that first one was two duplexes side by side. And then a lot of what I purchased from 2009 through 13, all those seller financing deals were small multifamily, a couple single family homes, because the sellers would have like a duplex and a single family home on one lot or on the same street, but mostly small multifamily up until 2013.
Okay. And what is considered small multifamily? Like what's the range there of units?
Yeah, I was doing, let's see, up till 2013, I think the largest I had purchased, was, I want to say six or eight units, something like that.
Okay. So 6 to 8 units. So I think a lot of people look at multifamily as being like the next level of real estate.
Yeah.
So people are buying single family houses, and then they think, well, one day I'm going to trade up into the multifamily world. So what made you jump into, it sounds like you jumped into multifamily pretty early.
Yeah, to me, it just made sense. And then as I was looking for seller financing deals, I realized all these sellers that were willing to carry financing, they were actually investors themselves. And so it was actually easier in a way. because with single family, as you have a tenant move out, 100% of rent's gone, right? And vacancy and turnover is expensive. And what I found with single family, a lot of the sellers of single family, that might be the one house that they own, right? It might have been their primary residence, and you're competing in a market where you have owner occupant buyers, and they're acting a lot on emotion, right? So they're paying top dollar, especially when I look back to 05, 06, 07, you had a lot of people coming in paying so much above what the market supported because they wanted that house, they wanted to move into that house, or it had something that fit their needs, and the prices were based on comps. But with these small multifamily properties, the owners of these properties, they were investors themselves. They had typically owned the property for a lot of years. They didn't want to necessarily get the property up to retail ready or put a for sale sign in the yard or alert their tenants. And so to me, it was just an easier natural conversation and easy transition into multifamily because a lot of these sellers just happen to have multifamily as they were investors.
Gotcha. So for the people that don't really understand the value that you bring being a borrower of seller financing, so let's just kind of flip the script and say you own a 10plex and you want to transition out of that asset. What's the value to you as an owner transferring from being an owner of real estate to an owner of a note?
For the seller, there's a lot of advantages. So for one, if you were to cash out a seller, they're going to pay a huge capital gain on the sale of that property. And so, most times, in fact, when I look back at the deals I've done, almost every seller has been, men and women in their 60s or 70s. And so a lot of times, by the time they're kind of in that part of their investment cycle, they don't want to be cashed out because they don't want to pay the huge capital gain. They don't want to actively invest. And, so the option of doing a 1031, even though it might be beneficial from a tax standpoint, these sellers typically they're not actively investing. A lot of times they own another business or they have another job and they're not out there in the market. They bought these assets, 30 something years ago, and they're not trying to, go actively invest or have another rental property. So I'd say those are the biggest is, not paying the capital gain all at once, not having to reinvest it, and same thing for cashing out. If, a lot of these sellers said, hey, I don't want the cash because for one, I don't want to pay the taxes and I don't want to put in the stock market because I don't trust the stock market. I don't want to actively invest because it creates a money problem. Now they have, nowhere to put the money. And so they're able to maximize their return by selling it, seller financing and just earn some interest on it. And then most of these sellers, that generation is typically self-managed. So you're also taking away a headache a lot of times. I mean, amazing people, a lot of times they've self-managed. So they've been maintenance person, repair person. They've been, dealing with tenants. They've been dealing with all the parts of real estate that I don't necessarily enjoy. So you're creating this new level of passivity for them, and they're able to kick back and get true mailbox money and be the bank. And I would say that's really one of the bigger ones, just that level of passivity that they get by not having to deal with the property.
Yeah, and I've found that to certainly be true, especially in that age group as well, because I think a lot of landlords are kind of taught, well, it's mailbox money, and that's partially true. The money does end up in your mailbox, but it's not as passive as what a lot of people think. That makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about that for just a quick second. So, I mean, if you have, some single families and you got some duplexes and I'm sure some triplexes and a 6-unit, a 10-unit. I mean, and these are all over the place. It seems like the management would be pretty intensive. So, I mean, how are you dealing with that?
I don't manage any of my properties today. When I turned everything over to property management, so kind of going back to, self-managing and the headaches and, the level of passivity, when I started buying these, one of the advantages too is because a lot of these landlords were good people, but just tired, it created a scenario where these properties were poorly managed and under rented and there was some deferred maintenance. And so I would take these properties over and I would have some bad tenants that, they'd move out, there'd be some repairs, there'd be some maintenance. And I was doing that stuff myself, right? And I was kind of handy, but not that handy. So I'm dealing with tenants, I'm dealing with the turnover, I'm dealing with all the stuff that I found that I didn't enjoy. And when I had 17 units and it was 10 o'clock at night and I'm repairing a toilet and I got young kids at home and I had to call, a plumber anyway, that's when I turned everything over to property management. And so I really found kind of through the process that I don't enjoy the property management aspect of it. I love putting deals together. That doesn't feel like work. I enjoy talking with people. I enjoy negotiating with sellers. But at 17 units, there were months that I never heard from a tenant, and there were months where it felt like a full-time job. And so I decided to turn everything over to property management, and that was the best decision ever. When I turned the property over to property management, it's, a couple months later, I bought my first 11 unit property, and I was really able to focus on finding more deals because I wasn't bogged down on all the little things.
And that's a great segue. So, how are you finding deals today? What do you find is the best source of lead generation for you?
I think the best source is really just genuine relationships, like organic networking. I buy some off on market stuff, but a lot of my stuff is off market, and it's truly relationship based. It's telling people what you're looking for. If you can get specific to a neighborhood and the type of property. So when I was buying those, multifamily properties, I was saying like, hey, I'm looking for multifamily in this neighborhood. I'm looking for multifamily in this neighborhood. So I don't send out mailers. I don't buy lists. Maybe there's a day that comes that I do that, but it's relationships with agents and brokers, but also just being willing to open your mouth and say, hey, here's what I'm looking for. Because a lot of the stuff that I've found, especially the off-market stuff, is just because I've opened my mouth and said, here's what I'm looking for.
So, are you a little bit surprised by that? So, I'm sure that there was a scenario in your career so far where you just had the perfect property fall into your lap based
Yep.
on the networking and the relationships that you've built. Can you kind of share an example where this has worked just perfectly?
Yeah, I'll share multiple examples because it was kind of a realization. So going back all the way to that very first property in 2005, when everyone can get a loan and you're competing with a bunch of cash in the market, and I'm making all these offers and just getting beat on all these properties, that first house was a friend of the realtor's son. And the realtor said, hey, my buddy's son bought this home at auction. He's fixing it up. Nobody knows it's for sale. Come look at it. And so in 2005, hot market, I'm standing inside this house going, nobody else knows it's for sale. And I realized this, I didn't realize it right then, but like later I realized, wow, it's relationship based, right? Like he's taking me to a house. Nobody else knows it's for sale yet. And I was able to buy that below market in a hot market, right? So now I have one house, and that was relationship. I went and made business cards and started passing them out and talking everyone I was talking to. And the second house was because I gave the card to a guy at the gym, right? The guy at the gym said, became a friend of mine, and he said, hey, my friend's dad's selling a home. And it was in a neighborhood I was looking at, and that thing appraised over 40,000 above what I bought it for. But it's because I opened my mouth and said, hey, here's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a property in this area. I'm looking to invest in real estate. I mean, I owned one house and had a business card saying that I'm a real estate investor because in my mind, I already was. And that's how I found that second house, and then kind of moving into, even to the most recent deal, my last, I own a couple mobile home parks. And, the first one was I had a broker sending me all this class A apartments. And I was like, hey, I'm looking for value add mobile home parks. And they had an in-house listing. And then the next mobile home park was a guy that I reached out to 10 years before. And I mean, and that's a great story because I reached out to a guy that was a developer 10 years before my last mobile home park purchase. And I reached out to him simply because I wanted to know a story. He was building all these beautiful buildings, and I called him up out of the blue and just wanted to know who he was. And he was gracious enough to sit down and kind of share his story. He was buying a bunch of, small multifamily stuff in the 70s when he was going to college. Now he's developing the land. And, he asked me one day, like 10 years later, hey, my friend's selling a single family home the town over. Are you interested? And I said, no, I'm really focusing on value add multifamily, but more specifically mobile home parks. And he said, I have a mobile home park. I had no idea this guy had a mobile home park. I didn't go into that relationship, 10 years before because I thought that this guy was going to sell me something. I got into that conversation, that relationship, because I just admired the work this guy did and wanted to know a story. 10 years later, that turned into a less than 2% down, 200% cash on cash return mobile home park. And it just, that's genuine relationships. It's not going into it with any alternative motive. It's just building relationships. And that's where I think the best deals are found.
And that's such a great point. There's so many people that say, well, I'll get started once I have some money to market, and
Yep.
you're just proof example here that you really don't have to go that route if you don't choose to go that route, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, you've built a really significant portfolio based on just networking and getting your name out there. That's really cheap or free. So you don't have to go the paid marketing side if you don't choose to do that. So I think it's really interesting that you're moving into the mobile home park space. So at what point did you decide to move into that, and what was the appeal to mobile home parks?
Yeah, really, it was kind of an interesting transition. So I had done these, smaller multifamily stuff, and I did a couple other purchases where they were, 15, 20 unit multifamily, and I really wanted to scale into larger multifamily. And mobile home parks, they weren't really on my radar as something that I was super interested in. But as I was looking in the multifamily space, I just felt like returns were getting condensed down to nothing. I mean, cap rates were just shrinking and condensing down. A lot of the stuff that was being sent to me, and even the off market stuff, I'm just digging through the numbers and I'm going, this is junk. Like I have no interest in, no returns. And, everything was based on performa. All the performance looked great, but I don't care about performa. I want actuals, so it would look real good on paper. And I started building these relationships with, commercial brokers. And it's kind of funny because on the residential side, you get a lot of agents saying, they send you stuff and say, oh my gosh, this is a great investment. And you look at it and go, no, this is the cute house in a great neighborhood, but it doesn't necessarily make it a good investment, right? And in the commercial space, it was actually similar. I thought that would change and there'd be a little more higher level of sophistication on the investment side. But same thing, a lot of these commercial brokers would say, oh my gosh, great investment. And I start digging into the numbers and I'm going, yeah, the performa looks great, but that's not what the actuals are. This is a horrible investment. If everything went perfect and you got rents, up to the higher than what it would probably rent for, then yes, it would pencil out as a very okay investment. I just wasn't attracted to that. Like I wanted return. I wanted something that made sense. And the mobile home park space operates a lot like multifamily. And the two mobile home parks that I purchased last year, they just fit that model of, poorly managed, under rented, some deferred maintenance, but they penciled the way they sat. So I like properties, they cash flow today, right? They cash flow when I buy them, but there's also upside. And these parks had that. They fit that model of they work today. When I close, they're cash flow positive, and there's a lot of upside.
That makes a lot of sense. So after doing a few different asset categories, what do you feel is your favorite?
I don't know if I have a favorite. I think I said it before. I've never bought a property that I regret buying. I like the mobile home park space. I think that things will shift, and I'll probably go back into multifamily. I think there's going to be an opportunity in that space. I mean, I think we're actually going to have a huge economic meltdown here shortly. I'm not an economist, and I'm not saying that I can predict anything, but I just have this gut feeling. There's a lot of things pointing to that. And I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity in the multifamily space.
It's really interesting to talk about multifamily. I have a friend of mine that has about 1,000 units, and he has about 130 unit complex in I'd say a B-class city. And I think he bought it in like 2010. So it was like a crazy cheap purchase. But he got offered $7 million for it. And he was like, Brad, I'm going to make like $4 or $5 million on this thing, but I don't know where to put the cash to even make it make sense. And he was like, I've looked at it forwards and backwards. This REIT that's going to come in that's made this offer, if they renovated the spaces, raised the rents, he said, I still can't make sense of it financially. And it seems like that there's a lot of pressure on the cap rates, especially once you get what he said above 80 units. It's just that's where the bigger players are coming in and doing that. Let's talk about the economy because it's something that I think is really interesting. Right now, there's approximately 7 million houses that are in forbearance or behind on payments. I saw an article in, I think it was from the Dallas Times that said it was in Houston Chronicle, I believe, 22% of FHA mortgages in Houston are behind on payments. I mean, that's a big, big number. So we kind of talked about you feel like there's going to be some economic downward pressure coming. What do you feel is coming, and what's the best way to play that in your space?
I think the best way to play it is really just be aware. Real estate doesn't move that fast in comparison to, say, the stock market, right? You're not going to wake up and everything's just going to be completely different in the real estate world. So I think for one, just being aware and paying attention. I mean, that's what really helped me, going into 2008 when people were freaked out. It was just paying attention to what the market's doing. That being said, I mean, I just think we're propped up as a nation on printed money. And so, it's not a political thing. It's just, there's a lot of money being printed, and there's a lot of money being printed and handed out to everybody, the poor, the middle class, the upper middle class, the rich, the ultra rich. There's a lot of money just being printed and given out. And I just don't think that's sustainable. And so, when that stops, and when businesses try to open back up, I think there's a lot of businesses that are just not going to make it. And, and those businesses have employees that just aren't going to have jobs. And those employees have to pay rent, and they're not going to be able to afford rent. So just on a really basic level. I just don't see as a country how that's sustainable. And, it's interesting to watch because interest rates are super low and, housing price inventory is low and people are paying a whole lot of money for a whole little. And I just don't see how that's sustainable. And, even in the multifamily space where I can see things, having issues is a lot of these syndications. And I think there's almost a bubble within the syndication model. Now there's some, I have some friends that run great syndications and people are really successful in that space, but a lot of people have jumped in that space and they're buying things that just don't have the return they used to. And if those properties, it's very similar to 08. I met a lot of people that they bought these properties banking on a lot of appreciation, or they had to have rent increases for the property to work. And so I think it's very possible that it's going to be that same scenario where these properties don't pencil today. And we're going to have this oh shit moment of, wow, this property does not appraise. This property does not rent for what we thought. And now what? And those properties are going to go back to the banks. And then in the single family and small multifamily space, it's going to be, oh, wow, I don't have a job anymore. I can't pay my mortgage, and it's going to go back to the bank. That's what I see. I'm not an economist. I don't really know. It's a gut feeling, and there's just too many signs that point to there's going to be a big change.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Everyone that I have on the podcast here the past 6 months has really, in one form or another, showed concern about what's going on in the real estate world and in the economy, and nobody really knows. And one of my favorite economic jokes, if there is such a thing, is 12 of the last 10 recessions have been predicted by economists. So,
Yeah.
Economists are all the time predicting these things, but I think that we can say that the market in certain asset classes just doesn't make sense. And I'm a big fan of Buffett. He's like, if something doesn't make sense, you invest in what makes sense to you, and what you understand. So that certainly makes sense. Let me ask this. So what do you think you would have liked to have known when you started that you now know today?
Gosh, that's a good question. I think, just realizing how, like early on, how important those relationships are. I mean, I realized that, but I think it, reflecting back, it took me several years to really realize, how important that is. I think the biggest thing that I'd want others to realize is like if you want it bad enough, you'll find a way. I mean, there's a lot of ways to be successful within real estate. So I think one thing for me was, I didn't go to any kind of paid event at all for like years, and then the first time I ever went to a paid event, I met other investors. And what I realized that I didn't realize before is everybody within the real estate world and investment real estate world, they were all doing it a different way. Like people were finding success in so many different types of real estate. And that really opened my mind to there's not just one way to do it. Like there's a lot of ways, and there's a lot of asset classes within real estate. And there's a lot of ways to be successful in real estate. I mean, people are kicking ass in single family and multifamily and commercial and self-storage and development. I mean, there's all these different ways, and you just gotta find what makes sense for you and go for it.
So let's say that I'm someone that I'm interested in real estate. I want to do this business, but I have no money and no time. And I have the idea that, well, I just can't do this business. So what do you say to that person? And I'm sure that because of your success, you have people come to you all the time with that exact scenario. So what do you say to people?
Yeah, I've had that scenario. I almost always say, go read Rich Dad Poor Dad and call him back. And and then a lot of them don't read the book, but the ones that do, they call me back. And those are the people that I love pouring into, right? So, and then I say kind of what I said earlier on the show. I said, start telling people what you're looking for. Start going through the process. Even in this market, even it being a hot market, you have to tell people what you're looking for, that you're getting into real estate, that you're looking to invest in real estate. And then you got to start analyzing deals. And so many people will message back and say, oh my gosh, I had no idea this guy that I worked with. I had no idea my neighbor, they owned investment property. But as soon as they open their mouth, all of a sudden they have all these conversations around real estate. And it's usually people in their world that they had no idea was involved in real estate in some form or another. And even if it's not someone directly in your circle, it might be a neighbor's mom or a friend's neighbor, whatever it might be. But as soon as they open their mouth and start sharing what it is that they're looking for, all these opportunities come their way. And that's like time and time again. And for me, that's super exciting when someone messages me back and was like, oh my gosh, I went on Craigslist, or I went and told my neighbor, I told this person at work, and they're interested in, they have rental properties, or they want to lend me money so I can invest in real estate. And you just got to open your mouth.
That's super cool, man. Very cool. Gabriel, for those that are interested in reaching out to you, how can they do that?
Yeah, the best way is on Instagram. I'm pretty active on Instagram, and it's just at Gabriel R. Hamel, or if you just search Gabriel Hamel, you'll find me.
Very good. We'll put that in the show notes, man. Appreciate you being with us. Enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.